Hey guys, tonight we step into a world that looks familiar in pictures, but feels startlingly different once you're actually standing in it. You're in ancient Egypt, not the glamorous postcard version, but the quiet, dusty morning the workers knew, long before the sun has fully climbed over the horizon. You can almost smell the cool mud brick walls around you, hear a rooster that sounds like it's been awake since the creation of the universe, and sense the soft grit of sand already trying to sneak into your sandals. This is the hour when your stomach wakes up before the rest of you, and you realize very quickly that breakfast here is not the cereal box fantasy you're used to. In fact, you probably won't survive this diet if you're expecting anything more exciting than grain, and, just to keep you on your toes, more grain. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the little trail of sleepy locations around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the half-dark, the air surprisingly chilly for a place known for scorching days. Egypt isn't always hot. Mornings often begin cold enough to make you pull your linen shawl tighter around your shoulders. Across the courtyard, someone else is also waking up. A neighbour stretching, yawning loudly and kicking at the sand as if it personally wronged him. You share the sentiment. Your stomach complains, but you already know what's coming. A breakfast so simple it feels more like an idea of food than the real thing. Early Egyptians didn't do elaborate morning feasts. No fried eggs, no fresh fruit bowls, and definitely no iced coffee. Unless you count a lukewarm beer-thickened porridge, which you don't. Instead, you're handed yesterday's bread. Dense, heavy, a brick disguised as nourishment. You bite into it slowly, partly because it's tough and partly because your teeth deserve time to prepare themselves emotionally. One mainstream fact historians always highlight: bread was the backbone of Egyptian life, eaten at basically every meal. This isn't a culinary choice, it's survival. But here's the first surprise of this journey. Bread isn't just bread here. Sometimes it has sand baked into it, sometimes ash, sometimes the occasional chunk of something the baker probably meant to remove. That's where the joke of the day sneaks in. You don't just eat breakfast. Breakfast eats back, slowly filing your teeth down like nature's own orthodontist. Archaeologists literally find Egyptian skeletons with teeth worn flat from years of this sand-laced diet. In the quiet morning, you glance to your left and notice a small clay bowl with a thin smear of something on the bottom. Maybe bean, paste from last night, maybe oil, maybe just a memory of seasoning. You scrape a finger through it anyway, hoping for flavour, but no flavour today. It's a culinary plot twist you definitely expected. The household around you moves slowly, easing into the rhythm of the day. Someone adds fresh fuel to the small fire. Another person coughs from the rising smoke that stubbornly lingers inside because chimneys are a luxury this kitchen has never heard of. Your nose scrunches, your eyes water a little. And yet this is normal. Smoke is seasoning now. Third joke of the section. If you don't smell a little like a smoked fish before midday, you're simply not living the Egyptian worker lifestyle correctly. There's a quirky fact to tuck into the moment. Egyptians sometimes used leftover beer sediment as a spread or mix-in for breakfast, creating a thick, pasty snack that modern chefs would politely describe as earthy, and everyone else would simply call "why is this happening?" You try it because the day isn't going to get any easier on an empty stomach. As you chew through your very chewy meal, the sun finally breaks over the horizon. It comes up fast in Egypt, as if someone flipped a celestial switch. Golden light spills over the flat rooftops and palm fronds, revealing the soft haze of dust always hanging in the air. This world is bright and quiet at the same time, like a painting that somehow breathes. You shift your weight, stretching out the stiffness from sleeping on a mat stuffed with reeds. Somewhere beyond your home, a donkey brays with so much emotional intensity it sounds like it's narrating its entire life story. It's a strangely soothing soundtrack to the morning. Just another reminder that the animals here are as dramatic as the humans. And then your mind turns, as it always does, to the work ahead. Bread in your stomach means it's time to get moving. Grinding grain, fetching water, shaping loaves. You know the routine. But before we get there, there's a small scholarly puzzle historians still argue over. Whether Egyptian workers regularly ate a kind of early breakfast stew, a leftover pot kept warm overnight, or whether morning meals were almost always just cold bread and beer, no one can say for sure. The evidence is dusty, the interpretation's murky, and historians, like your breakfast, can be a bit dry. But the morning continues either way. Your simple meal sits in your stomach like a loyal stone, giving you just enough strength to face the long day ahead. And as you step out into the rising golden warmth, brushing crumbs from your linen tunic, you feel the strange comfort of this simplicity. Food here might be plain, but it's predictable. It's the kind of nourishment that matches the rhythm of the land, slow, steady, humble. You take one more breath of the crisp air, savouring the quiet before the grind begins. The sun climbs, the day starts, and you walk forward into the life of an ordinary Egyptian worker, one small step at a time. You step into the courtyard, rubbing the last bits of sleep from your eyes, and there it waits. The grindstone, your old friend, your eternal nemesis, your unskippable gym membership you never asked for. Every single morning, without fail, you're greeted by this heavy slab of stone paired with its smaller handheld partner. Together they form the world's simplest and most exhausting kitchen appliance. And before the day gets hot enough to melt your hopes, you drop to your knees and begin the slow, steady push that turns whole emigraines into the flour that keeps ancient Egypt alive. The first scrape echoes into the morning, stone against stone, gritty and stubborn. Fine dust floats upward, coating your forearms, your tunic, your face, and yes, your breakfast. You don't complain. Nobody complains. Grinding the daily grain is just what must be done, the heartbeat of every household. One mainstream fact to remember: most Egyptians, especially workers, spent hours each day grinding wheat or barley for bread and beer. It wasn't a side chore, it was the chore. You hold the upper stone with both hands and move it back and forth in a rhythmic motion that somehow manages to be both soothing and maddening. The trick is to fall into a trance. Let your mind drift while your arms do the suffering. You sway slightly as you push the grain across the flat stone, the same motion repeated thousands of times. There's something almost meditative about it, if you ignore the burning in your shoulders and the fact that your knees are perfectly positioned to develop regrets later in life. The sun continues its climb, sending warm light across the courtyard. A few chickens peck around the edges, occasionally hopping close enough that you pause for a split second to make sure they're not stealing your hard-earned grain. Spoiler, they are absolutely stealing your grain. One bold hen struts by with the confidence of a seasoned bandit, and you wonder if she's been grinding alongside you this whole time, just to swoop in at the last second like some feathery tax collector. You take a break to shake out your wrists, stretching them until the stiffness eases. You glance at the pile of grain you still need to process and sigh, but quietly, because noisy complaining isn't a popular hobby here. Workers knew that simple repetition defined their lives. Besides, the more grain you grind now, the more bread your household has later. It's the closest thing ancient Egypt had to snack insurance. And then there's the quirky fact for this section. Archaeologists found tiny mineral fragments inside ancient Egyptian teeth, confirming that flour at the time often contained bits of stone from the grindstones themselves. Yes, you're literally grinding rock dust into your food. Yes, you're literally eating your kitchen equipment. And yes, that means your breakfast is technically stone ground in the most literal way possible. Somewhere, a modern health food marketer is shedding a single proud tear. As you keep grinding, pushing through the monotony, your mind drifts toward the faint hum of daily life surrounding you. Someone next door argues gently with a stubborn goat. Kids chase each other with sticks in what is probably some complicated game with rules nobody over the age of 10 understands. A neighbour's baby begins to wail, immediately echoed by another baby across the lane, beginning a duet you know will last a while. And over everything, the grinding rhythm continues, your slow scrape blending into countless others across the village. You lean forward, gathering the newly ground flour into a small jar. Your fingertips brush against the fine powder, soft as silt from the Nile. It smells earthy, warm, and familiar. This is survival made tangible. This is the ingredient that keeps life steady and predictable. Bread and beer, Egypt's twin pillars. Without grain, nothing else works. Workers don't eat, families don't function, temples don't distribute rations, royal projects don't rise from the desert. The pyramids themselves, in a way, were built on flour. Of course, as with nearly everything in ancient history, there's a debate tucked somewhere in the dust. Historians still argue whether households ground their own grain every single day, or if some families relied more on local grinding specialists, kind of like the ancient Egyptian version of a neighbourhood mill. The evidence is mixed. Some homes have grinding stones, others don't. Some records imply shared labour, others emphasise daily domestic work. The truth is probably a blend shaped by status, location, and how many hours of daylight were left before your arms gave up. You shift your weight, turning your back slightly to escape the drifting flour cloud, and joke number 2 arrives as naturally as the heat. You realise that grinding grain is ancient Egypt's version of joining a gym, except instead of paying a fee, you just pay with your sanity. You get back to it. Push, pull, push, pull. A little more grain, a little more dust, a little more wondering how on earth you ended up in a timeline where your morning workout involves kneeling on woven reeds and praying your elbows don't quit on you. Finally, after what feels like half a lifetime but was probably only 45 minutes, the day's flour quota sits ready. You scoop it into a clay pot, brush off your hands and stretch until your back cracks in 3 new places. The sun is higher now, warming the courtyard with a soft, buttery glow. A warm breeze drifts in from the Nile, carrying the faint smell of wet earth and fresh reeds. There's a strange comfort to these quiet moments. Simple tasks repeated across generations. Your grandparents ground grain, your parents did, and now you do. It ties you to the past in a way that feels steady, rooted, almost sacred in its simplicity. You stand, dust off your knees, and carry the pot of flour toward the kitchen area. It's time to shape loaves, fold dough, and hope the day leads to more food than dust. And maybe, if you're lucky, your elbows will forgive you before tomorrow. You carry the pot of freshly ground flour into the shade, relieved to give your arms a different job for once. The kitchen area isn't a room the way you imagine modern kitchens. It's more like a collection of useful objects arranged around a spot where someone once decided, yes, this is where we will burn things in a controlled manner. There's a clay mixing bowl, a small pile of yesterday's ashes, a jug of water, and a few tools that look like they've survived more dynasties than most kings. You set the flour down and roll your shoulders, knowing the next task isn't physically gentler, it's just painful in different ways. Bread making in ancient Egypt is, let's call it an adventure. You kneel beside the bowl and start pouring in small amounts of water, mixing slowly with your hands. The dough gradually becomes sticky, clinging to your fingers like it has abandonment issues. You try to peel it off, but the dough just moves around, redecorating your hands with the enthusiasm of an overeager toddler painting a wall. This is where you get your first joke of the section. Ancient Egyptian bread isn't so much kneaded as it is wrestled into submission. You punch it, fold it, press it flat, and wonder, very sincerely, if this dough is planning to fight back. As you work, the mixture becomes smoother, in theory. In reality, you can still feel bits of husk and the occasional sharp edge of grain that somehow escaped your grinding enthusiasm earlier. You add a little more water, then more flour, then, of course, too much water again. This seesaw battle continues until the dough holds its shape and stops acting like a living creature. The sun warms your back as you knead, and the simple rhythm makes the moment oddly peaceful. A mainstream fact slots into place as you work. Egyptians baked dozens of bread shapes, cones, discs, tall loaves, flat rounds, even moulds shaped like animals or deities. But the everyday worker's bread, dense, dark, and sturdy enough to double as a building material if necessary. Most of your loaves today will be simple flat shapes, quick to bake, quick to eat, or gnaw, and quick to replace when you inevitably drop one into the fire. You pinch off a lump of dough and begin shaping it into a small round. It looks almost cute in your hands, like a miniature sun. Another gets stretched into a thin oval. A third becomes a squat, dense puck that you just know is going to break at least one tooth later. But variety is the spice of life, and considering how rare actual spices are in your household, you take what you can get. Kids wander by to watch, and you hear little whispers. That one looks like a rock. That one looks like a rock with a dent. That one looks like all rocks. You narrow your eyes playfully at them and they scatter, laughing. Bread shaming begins early in this village. You smooth the tops of the loaves with a bit of oil, if you have any, or just water, creating a thin sheen. Beside you, a small clay mould sits waiting. You press dough into it, shaping a loaf that's more ornate. maybe for a special neighbor or an offering if the household is feeling pious today. Some Egyptians believed certain shapes carried symbolic meaning or encouraged blessings, which leads nicely into the quirky fact of this section. Some bread loaves were shaped to resemble human bodies or animals for ritual purposes, especially in temple contexts. Imagine making a bread cow with all the earnestness of a sacred task. You glance toward the clay oven, a beehive-shaped structure called a tabun. Flames flicker inside, and the heat radiates in shimmering waves. You'll use it soon, but not yet. The dough needs a moment to rest, to rise just slightly, because Emma wheat is stubborn and doesn't fluff easily. Think of it as the introvert of grains, not really interested in dramatic growth. The result is bread that's compact, heavy, and, according to ancient letters, occasionally hard enough to throw at someone in an argument. You sit back on your heels and wipe sweat from your forehead, listening to the quiet crackle of the fire. The smell of warm dough lingers in the air, soft and comforting, even if you know what comes out of the oven will be the opposite of fluffy. The domestic rhythm is broken only by a donkey braying again nearby, louder this time, as though protesting the unfairness of its own breakfast. As you wait, your mind drifts to a scholarly debate that still sparks disagreements today. Did Egyptians intentionally add fermented dough, a proto-starter, to help their bread rise, or was the rising effect purely accidental? Some argue they had early sourdough-style methods. Others say it was just luck and spontaneous yeast doing its uninvited magic. The truth? Your dough rises only when it feels like rising, and today it seems mildly cooperative. When the dough is ready, you lift the first flat round and walk toward the oven, feeling the heat intensify with each step. Baking becomes a delicate dance between done and on fire, with a surprisingly thin line in between. You slap the flat round against the inner oven wall, where it sticks immediately. Another goes next to it. A third falls off, rolls, and decides to become charcoal. You mourn it briefly, then move on. Ancient Egyptian kitchens didn't have timers. They had vibes and intuition. The first loaf begins to brown at the edges. You pry it off the wall with a stick, careful not to burn your fingers. It looks humble, slightly uneven, but it smells good. Warm, earthy, simple, just like everything else in your diet. And here comes your second joke of the section. Egyptian bread is the kind of food that tastes best when you're hungry enough to ignore its personality. More loaves follow, some perfect, some cracked, some destined for the poultry because even the chickens deserve disappointment occasionally. You set each finished round onto a reed mat to cool, feeling oddly satisfied. Bread making might be tedious, but there's something grounding about creating the thing that keeps your entire community alive. The bread cools, the air shifts, and you feel that familiar Egyptian truth. Life is simple here, sometimes frustratingly so. But the simplicity has its own comforting rhythm. You gather the steaming loaves, stacking them carefully in a clay basket, and prepare for the next essential task in your quiet, food-shaped day. Because shaping the loaves is only the beginning. Soon you'll need to fetch the water that brings everything else to life. You hoist the basket of warm bread against your hip, feeling the heat radiating through the woven reeds. It's comforting for a moment, until you remember your next task involves leaving the shade entirely. The sun is climbing, the air is thickening, and the Nile is calling you not with poetry or serenity, but with the blunt reminder that nobody eats, cooks, brews, or washes without water. So you set the bread down, grab 2 clay jars, and prepare for the daily walk that your shoulders absolutely hate. The jars are heavier than they look, clay always is, and the handles dig into your fingers in a way that makes you question every decision that brought you here. But here you are, stepping out of the courtyard and into the bright, dust-warmed morning. The street isn't paved, of course. Your sandals kick up soft puffs of sand as you walk past low mud brick homes, whose walls seem to melt into the light. A goat bleats accusingly from a doorway. Someone is sweeping. Someone else is half asleep on a stool, already over this entire day. You join the small stream of people making the same trip you are. This is one of the few moments in Egyptian daily life that everyone, elite or worker, understands intimately. The Nile gives life to all, and everyone needs to fetch its water. One mainstream fact slips easily into this moment. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was the backbone of transport, agriculture, fishing, religion, and daily survival. Without it, ancient Egypt simply wouldn't exist. Your pace slows when you reach the main path leading toward the riverbank. The air shifts here, cooler, wetter, carrying the earthy scent of silt and the faint sweetness of growing reeds. It's a relief compared to the dry courtyard you left behind. But with that relief comes caution, because as gentle as the Nile looks at first glance, it has its own hazards. Take, for example, the crocodiles. You step closer to the river, scanning the water automatically, because you've heard enough stories this month alone. The stories always start casually. I was just filling my jar, nothing special. And end with, and then something moved. You don't need that kind of narrative arc in your day. Egyptians respected the Nile deeply, partly because it nourished the land, partly because occasionally something with teeth the size of your hand might surge out of it. You find a good spot, close to the water, but not so close you risk of becoming a cautionary tale. You crouch, jar in hand, and the coolness of the Nile greets you instantly. The water is clear near the edge, shimmering under sunlight. Fish flicker just beneath the surface like living slivers of bronze. You fill the first jar slowly, letting it sink until it stops bubbling. The weight increases dramatically. You brace yourself, lift with both hands, and set it carefully on the sand. There's your first joke of this section. Nothing humbles you faster than realizing the jar you've filled now weighs approximately the same as your hopes and dreams. You fill the second jar, your fingers slipping slightly on the damp clay. A small splash hits your face, cool and refreshing. You blink and grin despite yourself. Moments like this, simple, quiet, oddly peaceful, make the tedious parts of life feel manageable. Someone further down the river laughs, probably at something a child said. A group of women rinse cloth in rhythmic motions. The Nile moves at its own unhurried pace, and for a breath or two you move right along with it. Then, as always, a quirky historical detail drifts into your thoughts. Some Egyptians used small clay filters to strain Nile water before drinking, because the river often carried silt, plant debris, and tiny creatures. The filters didn't remove everything, but they showed a fascinating early attempt at water purification. Today, you simply trust that boiling will do the job later. Until then, you just don't think too hard about what might be floating around. Before lifting the full jars to begin the journey back, you take a moment to look across the river. Boats drift slowly along the current, reed skiffs, wooden fishing vessels and larger barges carrying goods or workers. Their sails catch the sunlight, turning pale linen into glowing triangles. Somewhere upriver, a temple perches near the bank like a guardian, its whitewashed walls bright against the landscape. You know priests draw water too. Even royalty depends on the Nile's generosity. It's strangely comforting, realizing everyone shares this ritual, even if you share nothing else. But no ancient Egyptian morning is complete without a scholarly puzzle to chew on while your arms prepare for pain. Historians still argue whether daily water fetching fell mostly to women, to younger family members, or simply whoever had time. Artwork shows a mix. Letters hint at different practices across classes, and archaeological finds, like jar storage rooms inside some homes, suggest variation. Today, it falls to you, because your household needs water, and no one else volunteered. You secure the jars with a length of woven rope, threading it through the handles so the loads balance more evenly across your shoulders. You inhale once, twice, and lift. The strain hits instantly. Your arms tremble, your back tightens, your legs swear under their breath, but you manage to stand upright. You wobble slightly. Someone nearby offers a sympathetic nod that says, "Yes, friend, we're all suffering together." You start walking. Each step sends a tiny slosh inside the jars. The weight swings gently, challenging your balance. Sand shifts under your sandals. You try not to imagine tripping, falling, and baptizing yourself in front of half the village. Your internal monologue turns into today's second joke. If ancient Egypt had gym memberships, this would be the premium quad and shoulder workout they'd charge extra for. Finally, after an eternity disguised as 10 minutes, you reach home. You set the jars down with the reverence normally reserved for sacred relics. Your shoulders sigh dramatically. You wipe your forehead with the back of your arm and take a deep breath, savoring the faint coolness still clinging to the clay. This water will become so many things: bread dough, beer mash, boiling broth, washing water, cooling drink. It's the silent ingredient behind every meal you'll make today. You stand for a moment, letting the morning ambient sounds settle over you again. A bird chirps. Someone calls out for a child. The smell of baking bread drifts from a neighbour's home, warm and familiar. You've fetched the water. You've earned a moment of quiet. But soon you'll be using that same water for something far more important to daily life than anyone likes to admit. Brewing the thick, gritty beer that Egyptians considered more food than drink. You rest your hands on your knees for a moment, letting your breath return while the 2 jars of Nile water sit there like silent, judgmental boulders. But you already know what comes next. The bread may feed your body, but the real fuel of ancient Egypt, the stuff that keeps the workers upright, the fields running, the quarries active, and the gossip flowing, is beer. Not the bubbly golden kind modern people sip at barbecues. No, Egyptian beer is thick, cloudy, sludgy, and so nutritionally dense that calling it a drink feels inaccurate. It's more like a meal that forgot it was supposed to be solid. You lift 1 jar and pour some water into a mixing pot. The clay vessel leans slightly to one side because nothing here is perfectly symmetrical except the pyramids, and you're not living inside one of those. You break yesterday's bread into chunks, because stale bread is the main ingredient, and toss them into the water. They bob around sluggishly like tired swimmers who regretted diving in. You mash them down with a stick, stirring until the mixture becomes the consistency of wet clay. Here's the first joke of the section. Egyptian beer is what happens when bread and water have an argument and decide to split the difference. The mash smells yeasty and earthy. Not bad, just blunt. You set the pot near the warm hearth, letting the mixture rest and naturally ferment. Wild yeast floats everywhere in Egypt, on grains, in the air, on your hands, so fermentation finds you whether you're ready or not. In a few hours, the mash will bubble lightly, producing the fizzy, nutrient-rich brew that powers your day more effectively than any modern smoothie. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. Beer was consumed daily by nearly all Egyptians, men, women, children, and workers, because it was safer than untreated water and provided vital calories. It wasn't recreational, it wasn't fancy. It was survival in liquid form. As the mash sits, you prepare the second step, straining. You lift another jar of water, dilute the thick mixture, and pour it through a woven basket that acts like the ancient world's least effective coffee filter. Some solids stay behind, others slide right through with suspicious enthusiasm. What you're left with is a murky liquid, creamy beige in colour, smelling of grain, yeast, and the faint tang of fermentation. You hold the pot close and watch tiny bubbles form on the surface. This is where the drink begins to come alive. You stir slowly, listening to the soft crackle of fermentation and the distant cluck of chickens, because even the chickens seem to be supervising your technique. The next quirky tidbit lands right in the centre of your brewing chores. Egyptians sometimes flavoured their beer with dates for sweetness, or added herbs for medicinal effects, though most everyday brews were plain and practical. Luxury versions existed, but you're not royalty, so your brew tastes like the colour beige. The thick beer will later be stored in clay jars sealed loosely with linen. Workers often received beer rations instead of money, because nothing says great job like being compensated with drinkable porridge. You dip a ladle into the early stage brew and taste it. It's warm, tangy, and slightly gritty. It coats your tongue the way you imagine wet dust might. You grimace, but only a little. This is the flavour of your homeland. This is fuel. And after hours of work, it's actually shockingly good. A neighbour pokes their head through the doorway. Is it ready yet? They ask, even though it is obviously not. You wave them away. Later. When later? You don't dignify that with a response. Brewing is a social act here. When one household makes beer, everyone else suddenly remembers a reason to visit. Children peer in, hoping for a sip. They won't get one. Not yet anyway. But they know the smell means good things are coming. While the mash settles into its slow fermentation, your mind drifts to a lively scholarly debate. Historians still argue about the exact brewing process Egyptians used, whether they baked special beer loaves first, soaked regular bread, or created a dual-grain mash similar to early barley beers. The depictions in Tumart are vague, leaving everyone to interpret through fragments of evidence. You just follow the method your family taught you, which likely evolved through generations of, this seems to work. The sun has climbed higher now. Light streams across the clay vessels, catching tiny particles floating in the air. Yeast, flour dust, pollen, all the bits of life swirling around. The heat speeds the fermentation, and the mash begins to bubble more vigorously. Tiny pops rise from the pot like quiet murmurs. You stir again, and the liquid moves thickly, leaving trails on the surface. This stuff is hearty, strong, unapologetically simple. It's the kind of drink that could stop a hangover before it begins, mostly because you'd need to drink a heroic amount to actually get drunk. And here comes joke number 2. Egyptian beer doesn't hit you fast. It simply sits in your stomach and politely refuses to leave. You cover the pot with a cloth and carry it to a cooler corner of the kitchen. It will finish fermenting there while you go about your day. The smell lingers on your hands, earthy and faintly sour, like warm dough left too long in the sun. You rinse your fingers with a trickle of Nile water, not because you expect it to remove the scent, but because it's one of those rituals that makes you feel slightly more civilized. Outside, the village hums with midday energy. Workers haul tools. Farmers call out across fields. Someone is fixing a fence using methods that absolutely will not hold. And through it all, that quiet knowledge loops through your mind. Every household around you depends on this same brew, this same cycle of mixing, fermenting, straining, pouring. It's the substructure of daily life, woven just as tightly as the baskets that hold the jars. You lean against the doorframe and breathe in slowly. Bread is already cooling. Water has been fetched. Beer is bubbling quietly in the corner. This is what a working Egyptian morning feels like. Simple, repetitive, and nourishing in ways that don't need glamour. But soon you'll leave the kitchen and step toward the fields, where the next part of your meal grows in long, dusty rows. Onions, leeks, garlic, and the vegetables that define the Egyptian diet. You step out into the late morning light, leaving the bubbling beer behind like a tiny, fermenting promise of later comfort. The air outside has shifted, warm but not scorching yet, carrying a faint oniony scent that seems to cling to the very soil of Egypt. And it makes perfect sense why. As you walk toward the fields with a small reed basket under your arm, you're heading straight into the heart of the Egyptian diet, which can be described in 3 proud, pungent words: onions, leeks, garlic. You follow the narrow path that snakes between homes and into the cultivated plots beyond. These fields aren't vast green seas like modern industrial farms. They're smaller, tidier, almost cozy. Low mud brick walls section them off, and irrigation channels cut through the soil with geometric precision. This is the lifeline of Egypt's vegetables. Nile water diverted and guided with an engineer's patience. The moment you step into the field, the sun warms your shoulders, and you're hit with the unmistakable scent of sharp greenery. Not floral, not fresh like mint or citrus. No. These plants smell like they're ready to defend themselves in battle. Egyptians loved strong-flavored produce. One mainstream historical fact slips into view. Onions, leeks, and garlic were essential staples across all social classes, not just for flavor, but for nutrition, medicine, and even religious offerings. Workers ate them daily. Priests used them in rituals. Even mummies sometimes received them as fragrant. Companions into the afterlife. You kneel in the soft soil and begin loosening the base of a leek. Its long stalk bends slightly as you tug. The roots cling stubbornly, as if the plant has decided it's not ready for destiny. You place your hands firmly around the stalk and give it a confident pull. It pops out, dirt exploding upward in a tiny dramatic display. You blink, wipe your face, and there's your first joke of the section. Egyptian vegetables don't want to be harvested. They would prefer to stay in the ground and mind their own business. You set the leek in your basket and move on to onions. These grow in neat little clusters, their papery skins rustling softly as you gather them. The smell hits you again, a mix of sweetness and sharpness that promises both nourishment and the likelihood that your breath will be a social weapon for several hours. You pluck them one by one, brushing off the loose soil. Their weight is comforting in your hand, solid and full of potential meals. Nearby, another worker hums softly while harvesting garlic. The bulbs peek out from the soil like pale treasures. When they're exposed to the sunlight, they shine faintly. You help untangle a few from the ground, their skins crackling like dry parchment. The aroma wafts upward, unmistakable, sharp, powerful, proudly pungent. This brings you to the quirky historical fact of the section. Egyptians believed garlic could boost strength, and even used it as rations for labourers on major construction projects. Some records claim that garlic was distributed to pyramid builders to keep them healthy and energised, though whether this was real policy or just ancient workplace gossip remains one of history's little mysteries. You add a handful of garlic bulbs to your basket. The mix of smells is both comforting and overwhelming. Your hands now smell like someone roasted an entire festival meal directly into your skin, which honestly isn't far from daily Egyptian reality. You stand and stretch your back. Heat ripples across the fields. The irrigation channels glisten in the sun, carrying water that trickles rhythmically between rows of green. Frogs croak, birds hop between plants searching for insects. The whole place hums with quiet activity. You take a moment to appreciate the simplicity of these crops. They're not glamorous, no delicate spices, no exotic imports. But they are reliable, growing in almost any soil, tolerating Egypt's harsh conditions, storing well, and packing enough flavour to elevate even the plainest meal. And because you're in ancient Egypt, where everything eventually becomes a point of scholarly debate, you think of the current argument among researchers. Did common Egyptian households eat vegetables raw more often, or were most of them stewed with herbs and oils? Some say raw onions were a daily snack. Others point to cooking residues in ancient pots suggesting everything was gently simmered. The truth probably shifts by season and by household. Today, you'll take yours whichever way makes you work less. You load the last of the leeks and turn to head home. The basket now smells like a tiny vegetable storm cloud, radiating wonderful, tear-inducing fragrance. As you walk, a neighbour waves and calls out, "Good harvest today?" You nod. "They smell strong from here," they add. You nod again, because there's no point denying it. You smell like you've been wrestling salad. Halfway back, the second joke of the section slips naturally into your thoughts. You realise that between the bread grinding, beer stirring, and onion pulling, ancient Egyptian life is basically a series of chores, perfectly designed to create the world's most powerful forearms. Returning home, you set your basket on a low table. You separate the vegetables, some for stews, some for roasting, some to be eaten raw with bread. The kitchen fills with the smells of sharp greens mixing with warm bread and faint yeast. It's the scent of everyday Egyptian life, unremarkable yet deeply comforting. You rinse a few onions in a bowl, letting the brown skins swirl like tiny boats before sinking. The water browns slightly, carrying the earthy scent with it. You peel one onion and slice it with a small flint knife. Your eyes burn instantly. Tears roll down your cheeks, not because you're emotional, but because Egyptian onions have decided you should be. You munch a slice anyway. Sweet, sharp, familiar. The flavour roots you in this place, this morning, this simple life. For a brief moment, everything feels still. The bread you baked earlier rests on a reed mat. The beer bubbles quietly in its corner. The vegetables glow softly in the light. Your home is filled with the humble ingredients that shaped centuries of Egyptian cooking. And soon you'll turn toward the sweeter side of the diet. Not extravagant, not daily, not abundant, but treasured whenever it appears. Figs, dates, grapes, and the simple fruits that made life just a touch more delightful. You wipe your eyes, still watering from that rebellious onion, and step back into the courtyard, letting the warm air soothe away the sting. The day has fully arrived now. Light pours in like melted gold, and shadows shorten beneath the mud brick walls. You breathe in slowly, taking in the earthy scent of vegetables, the faint yeasty note of fermenting beer, and something else drifting faintly from a neighbour's home. Something sweet. That sweetness nudges your memory. Today might just be one of those rare days where fruit makes an appearance in your household. Not because you're wealthy, or because Egypt is overflowing with dessert options, but because occasionally the season and your luck align. Fruit in ancient Egypt isn't a daily expectation, it's a treat, a bright spot in an otherwise flavour-straightforward diet built on grains and greens. You reach for your small reed basket again. It still smells faintly of garlic, but honestly everything smells like garlic right now, including you. You step into the warm sunlight and make your way toward a small garden plot that your household tends, a modest mix of greenery, and if you're lucky, something sweet tucked among the leaves. As you approach, you spot them immediately. Small figs, dark and plump, hanging from a tree that looks like it's been here since the reign of someone with an extremely long name. You reach up and gently pluck one. Its skin is soft beneath your fingers, slightly sticky, as if the fruit is already sweating in the heat. You drop it into your basket and grab a second. Figs are beloved here, not because they're fancy, but because they grow well, ripen quickly, and taste like someone turns sunlight into candy. One mainstream historical fact fits neatly in this moment. Figs and dates were the most common fruits in ancient Egypt, eaten fresh, dried, mashed into cakes, or added to breads. They were practical and versatile, and for workers like you, they were a little burst of joy in an otherwise simple diet. You wander to the date palms next, their tall trunks rough beneath your palm as you brace yourself to stretch upward. You grab a cluster of dates, soft and amber brown, warm from the sun. They stick slightly to your fingertips, their natural sugars turning them into the ancient world's most committed snack. You pull off a handful and tuck them into your basket. The sweetness is intoxicating compared to the earthy tones of vegetables. It feels like a reward, a small celebration of the day you've already endured. But fruits are seasonal, and you never know when the next batch will come. Which brings you to the quirky fact of this section. Egyptians sometimes dried entire strings of dates or figs and stored them as emergency rations, even placing them in tombs as afterlife snacks. That's right. Somewhere in a royal burial chamber, a 3,000-year-old fruit snack might still be sitting patiently, waiting for someone who is definitely not coming back for it. You sit on a low wall and bite into a fresh fig. It splits open gently, its tiny seeds crunching softly as the sweetness floods your tongue. Compared to your daily bread, which tastes somewhere between nutty and, did I just chip a tooth? This is luxury, pure luxury. A neighbour passes by and nods approvingly at your little bounty. Good figs this season, they remark. You nod back, still chewing, cheeks full like a guilty squirrel. Remember to share, they add teasingly. You do not nod at that part. You gather grapes next, not in huge clusters like modern vineyards produce, but smaller, dusted with the fine white bloom that tells you they're ripe. Egyptians didn't always eat grapes fresh. Often they dried them into raisins or pressed them into wine if they belonged to higher classes. Working families like yours? You're savouring each grape slowly, thanking the Nile and the sun for cooperating long enough to bless you with something this delightful. You return home with your basket half full, the bright smell of fruit mixing strangely, but not unpleasantly, with the lingering scent of onions and garlic. You set everything on a simple reed mat inside your home, arranging figs, dates, and grapes gently. They don't last long. Egyptian heat can turn fruit into a sad mush very quickly, so you pick up a few pieces to enjoy immediately. As you chew, your mind drifts toward one of history's ongoing debates. Did everyday Egyptians eat fruit regularly when in season, or was most of it diverted to elites, temple offerings, and preservation? Some records suggest seasonal abundance, others show tight rationing. Archaeologists find fruit seeds in worker villages, but also in elite tombs. The truth is muddy, like the Nile after flood season. You taste another date. It's soft, warm, almost caramel-like, sticky enough that you wipe your fingers on your tunic, adding another layer of scent to your already fragrant ensemble. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, and you close your eyes, savouring it longer than necessary. Then comes the second joke of the section. Egyptian fruit is so good it briefly convinces you your life isn't 90% chores. A soft breeze drifts into the room. The clay walls hold the coolness just long enough to let you enjoy the moment. Light slants across the floor, highlighting the patterns of woven mats and jars. Outside, you hear someone calling to a neighbour, someone else arguing with a goat. Presumably the goat started it, and a child laughing loudly enough to echo. You rinse the fruit in a small bowl of water, gently because the figs bruise easily. Then you set a few aside for later, carefully under a linen cloth. Saving fruit in Egypt is like saving happiness for future you. It's rare enough that you treat it like treasure. The quiet sweetness anchors you, a reminder that even in a diet full of grains and greens, life occasionally gives you something soft, juicy, and delicious. Something that feels like a break from the routine, but sweetness can only go so far. Soon you'll turn toward the condiments and extras that add the tiniest sparkle to your meals: honey, salt, herbs, and the rare treats that ancient Egyptians prized as though they were edible gold. You stretch your back, feeling the soft ache of the morning settling in, and glance at the small pile of fruit you've tucked beneath a linen cloth. Sweetness like that is fleeting. But now your eyes slide toward the corner of the kitchen where the real treasures hide. The things that take an ordinary Egyptian meal and give it the tiniest spark of excitement. Not luxuries exactly, just enhancements, finishing touches, the edible equivalent of a wink. You cross the room and lift a small clay jar sealed with a lump of dried mud. The jar is squat and heavy, its surface etched with little fingerprints from whoever shaped it years ago. You break the seal gently, letting the dry mud crumble away. Inside, golden light catches on the thick amber substance clinging to the walls. Honey. Real honey. Not the everyday employee of the kitchen. This is the part-time consultant who shows up rarely, charges too much and leaves everyone impressed. You dip a small reed spoon inside and watch the honey stretch luxuriously before snapping into the jar. It's thick, rich, sticky enough to glue your sandals to the ceiling if you really wanted to. The sweetness hits your nose instantly. Floral, warm, almost intoxicating after a morning spent with vegetables that smell like they're plotting something. One mainstream historical fact fits perfectly here. Honey was ancient Egypt's main sweetener, prized enough to be offered to gods, used in medicine, preserved with ration records, and even placed in tombs for the afterlife. Not everyone had easy access to it, and certainly not in large amounts. Your household probably gets just a jar or two a year. You dab a tiny amount onto your fingertip and taste it. For a moment, everything else disappears. It's soft, silky, sweet enough to make your brain forget you've been eating sand-speckled bread all week. You close your eyes and savor it while the second joke of the day sneaks in. Honey is so good it briefly convinces you ancient Egyptians had dessert as a personality trait. But honey isn't the only gem in your kitchen. You turn and lift a smaller jar filled with tiny white crystals. Salt. But not the table salt modern people casually sprinkle. This salt travelled miles, scraped from desert flats, traded across regions, sometimes mixed with impurities that give it a faint beige tint. It's precious, carefully rationed, and used sparingly because salt here isn't just flavour. It's preservation. You pinch a little and let it fall between your fingers. The grains glisten like tiny sunlit shards. Egyptians used salt to dry fish, preserve meat, and season vegetables. They even used it in mummification, which is one of those details you try not to think about while sprinkling it into soup. You place the jar back and reach for something humbler, a handful of dried herbs tied into a small bundle. Their scent is faint but earthy. Coriander, maybe. Fenugreek if you're lucky. Dill if you're lucky and blessed by at least 3 minor gods. Egyptians didn't have access to a huge array of spices the way later cultures did, but they made the most out of what they had, adding depth to stews and breads through subtle herbal touches. Next, your hand finds a little clay pot filled with something dark and glossy. Date syrup, made by crushing dates, heating them gently, and letting the sugars reduce into a thick caramel-like liquid. It's cheaper than honey, easier to store, and delicious on bread if you don't mind ending up sticky for the next 4 hours. You tilt the pot slightly. The syrup coats the rim like molasses, too slow and too thick to hurry. Date syrup is the ancient Egyptian equivalent of having a good day. If someone offers it to you, you accept with gratitude and maybe even a suspicious glance to make sure they aren't trying to buy your loyalty. You line up the little treasures in a neat row. Honey, salt, herbs, date syrup, a few dried figs. It looks simple, because it is. But in ancient Egypt, this might as well be a full-tasting menu. Then comes a quirky historical tidbit. Egyptians sometimes used natron, a naturally occurring mix of salts, to season food as well as preserve bodies. Imagine seasoning your dinner with the same stuff used for mummies. Delicious, haunting, versatile. You place the natron jar far from the cooking area. That stays strictly on the please don't accidentally use this shelf. As you work, you hear someone outside arguing with a very stubborn donkey, Egypt's unofficial alarm clock and chaos mascot. The donkey refuses to move. The person refuses to surrender. It's a classic Egyptian standoff. You smile as the third joke drifts into the moment. In ancient Egypt, even the animals know they're part of the drama. Your fingers graze a tiny linen pouch hanging from a peg. Inside are sesame seeds. Rare, expensive, likely acquired during some favourable trade. They're too precious to eat in handfuls. You sprinkle them sparingly onto bread when you want to feel fancy. Today you shake the pouch gently, hearing the soft rattle of seeds inside. Not quite fancy day levels, maybe tomorrow. You take a deep breath. The combined scents of fruit, herbs, honey and grain swirl together into an atmosphere that's warm, comforting and grounded in the simplicity of the land. This kitchen may be small and your tools may be simple, but the ingredients in front of you have fueled a civilization for thousands of years. They've flavoured moments of celebration, sustained workers through long hours and carried prayers to the gods. You begin arranging the ingredients for midday meals. Bread, yes, and onions, yes, but also a small drizzle of sweet date, syrup on a cooling loaf, a tiny luxury, a quiet joy. But sweetness and seasoning can only enhance so much. Soon, your attention will shift to one of ancient Egypt's most fickle foods, sometimes easy to catch, sometimes stubborn, often smelly, occasionally delicious, and always influenced by the moods of the Nile: fish. You wipe your hands clean of sticky date syrup, mostly clean anyway, and step outside, letting the warm breeze brush against your cheeks. The Nile isn't far, and its shifting shimmer catches your eye as you walk toward the bank. Today you'll try your luck with fish. Not because you're feeling ambitious, but because fish is one of those foods that appears in your diet only when circumstances, weather, and sheer cosmic luck line up in your favour. Fish in ancient Egypt is a mix of blessing and gamble. Some days the Nile practically hands them to you. Other days it acts like it doesn't know what a fish is. You grab a net, woven from reeds and frayed in 3 places, and sling it over your shoulder. The net smells faintly of river water and faintly of failure, a promising combination. As you approach the river, the heat wraps around you like a linen cloak fresh from the oven. The Nile glitters in the late morning sun, its surface rippling with the gentle movement of the current. You step closer, sandals sinking slightly into damp mud. A few workers are already there, knee-deep in the water, casting nets and shouting advice at one another. You smile. The advice is terrible, but everyone shouts it anyway. One mainstream historical fact fits easily into this moment. The Nile provided a wide range of fish species: tilapia, catfish, perch, mullet. And fish was a vital protein source for many Egyptians when available. But availability is the tricky part. You wade into the shallow water, the coolness instantly soothing against your skin. You toss your net out in a quick arc. It spreads slightly, then collapses like an exhausted bird and sinks. You wait, a long moment, then you pull. Nothing. You sigh, already preparing yourself emotionally for a vegetable-heavy lunch. A neighbour wades by. "Try again," they say helpfully. You smile politely and think, "Yes, thank you. I was planning to give up after one attempt." You cast again, using a little more force. The net spreads a bit wider this time. A tiny victory. You pull it back. Something wriggles inside, not a fish, just a very offended frog. You release it immediately. It stares at you with deep judgmental energy before hopping away. Here's your first joke of this section. In ancient Egypt, the frogs sometimes catch you instead. But you're patient. You cast again and again. And on the 4th attempt, you feel resistance. Real resistance. You pull the net toward you, arms trembling with a mix of excitement and the undeniable fact that your muscles are very tired of tasks today. Inside the net is a small fish, silvery and thrashing. You grin, not a feast, but a victory. You wade out of the water and place the fish into a small clay bucket. Its scales gleam, catching the sunlight like tiny mirrors. You know exactly how you'll season it. Salt, herbs, maybe a drizzle of leftover date syrup if you want to experiment. Egyptians weren't known for elaborate fish recipes, but they did enjoy grilling or drying them for later. A quirky historical fact swims into your mind as you watch the fish settle. Some Egyptians mummified fish as offerings to the god Sobek, the crocodile deity associated with the Nile. Thousands of mummified fish have been found, carefully wrapped like tiny scaly burritos destined for divine approval. You glance at the water, half convinced that catching the fish might have offended a crocodile somewhere upstream. You reassure yourself by staying firmly on land for the rest of the day. You clean the fish at the bank using a small flint blade to remove scales and gut it quickly before the heat makes the smell unbearable. The fish is small, but its flesh is firm and pale. You rinse it in a little Nile water, careful not to let go, because watching your lunch swim away after all this effort would be genuinely tragic. You carry your bucket back home, sand clinging to your wet feet. The courtyard greets you with the familiar scents of bread and vegetables. You place the fish on a flat reed mat and sprinkle it with salt. You rub a few crushed herbs onto its surface. It already smells promising. You heat a small clay pan over the fire, one that's seen better days but still holds together. When the surface is hot enough, you lay the fish on it. It sizzles immediately, the sound crisp and satisfying. The smell drifts upward, rich and savoury, mingling with the soft smoke that perpetually clings to your kitchen. As the fish cooks, you remember the scholarly debate that still bubbles among historians like fermenting beer. How common was fish consumption among everyday Egyptians? Some argue it was a frequent part of the diet thanks to the Nile's abundance. Others point to religious and occupational restrictions that limited fish eating in certain regions. Written records contradict each other, as usual. Your reality is simple. If you catch it, you eat it. You flip the fish carefully with a reed spatula. It lands perfectly, which is surprising because your cookware has exactly zero interest in cooperating today. The skin crisps, the flesh turns opaque, the edges brown beautifully. You feel a quiet swell of pride, because cooking fish over an uneven fire in an ovenless kitchen is a special kind of culinary sorcery. Your second joke surfaces naturally as you check the fish. Egyptian fish cuisine is best described as, how good can I make this taste before it burns? You pull the fish from the fire and set it on a plate. Well, a clay dish that wobbles because one side is slightly thicker than the other. You sit in the shade, break a small piece of bread and take the first bite. The flavour surprises you every time. Simple seasoning, simple cooking, but the result is clean, warm, satisfying. The herbs cut through the richness. The salt highlights the natural sweetness. The bread soaks everything up like a grateful sponge. For a moment, life feels calm, balanced, nourishing in the most literal sense. Then someone calls your name from across the lane. They mention something about market day and meat, and your ears perk up instantly. Meat is not a common guest in your household, and when it does arrive, it's an event worth dropping everything for. You finish your fish, wipe your hands, and stand. Because if there's even a whisper of meat available today, you're not missing that chance. You barely finish swallowing the last bite of fish before your attention snaps toward the voice, calling about market day. Meat, true meat, is not something you casually ignore in ancient Egypt. It's not common, it's not cheap, and it's definitely not the sort of thing you casually stroll past while deciding between linen colours. Meat is an event, a once-in-a-while punctuation mark in the long sentence of your grain-based life. You grab your small basket, still smelling faintly of figs and garlic, and make your way toward the bustling market square. The sun hangs high now, hot enough to make the air shimmer. People crowd the path ahead. Farmers carrying bundles of reeds, potters with stacks of bowls balanced on their heads, children weaving between legs like determined dust-covered cats. The marketplace is loud in a familiar way. Traders shout prices, goats bleat dramatically, and someone's rooster insists on crowing even though it is very much not dawn. You weave through clusters of baskets, jars, and determined merchants until you finally reach the source of the buzz, the butcher's stall. There it is, laid out on a reed mat beneath a makeshift canopy, actual meat. A few cuts of goat, some scrappy-looking lamb ribs, and something unidentifiable but vaguely bird-shaped. None of it looks particularly glamorous. Most pieces are chewy, tough, slightly grey around the edges from the heat, and yet your stomach practically sings. A mainstream fact anchors the scene. Meat was rare in everyday Egyptian diets, usually reserved for festivals, wealthier families, temple offerings, or workers receiving special rations. The average person could go weeks without tasting meat unless something lucky happened, or something unlucky happened to a neighbour's goat. You approach cautiously. The butcher nods at you, wiping his hands on a cloth that has definitely seen better days. "You looking for something special?" he asks. You try not to sound too eager. "Just seeing what's fresh today." The butcher laughs, because nothing here is technically fresh. It's as fresh as the heat allows, which is ancient Egyptian for eat this immediately or don't eat it at all. You inspect the options. A slab of goat meat that looks tough enough to challenge you to a duel. Some ribs with just enough meat to justify chewing. And a bird so scrawny you wonder what diet it's been following. Definitely not the fruit-heavy luxury regime. You pick a modest piece of goat, small, affordable, and hopefully less chewy than it appears. You drop a few copper pieces into the butcher's hand and he nods approvingly. "Good choice," he says. "Boil it long enough and it only fights back a little." This brings your first joke of the section. Ancient Egyptian meat isn't tender. You just cook it until it gives up. You tuck the meat carefully into your basket, shielding it from the sun with a bit of linen cloth, and begin your walk home. The smell of the marketplace fades behind you, replaced by the quieter rhythm of village life. A potter carries new bowls past you. A child waves while holding a frog. The frog does not wave back. Someone haggles loudly over the price of beer rations. Back in your courtyard, you set the goat meat on a flat slate and inspect it again. It's lean, very lean. More muscle than fat, more fibre than softness. It's the kind of meat that demands a slow, patient approach. You fetch your largest clay pot, fill it halfway with Nile water, and set it over the fire. The flames lick the pot's sides, heating the water until it begins to tremble with tiny bubbles. You drop the meat in, and the smell begins slowly. Faint, savoury, promising. You add onions, leeks, a few herbs, and just a sprinkle of salt. Nothing fancy. Ancient Egyptians didn't drown meat in spices. They simply let the ingredients speak for themselves. In this case, the meat speaks mostly in grunts. As the stew simmers, the scent fills the space with warmth and something deeper. A sense of home. The steam carries hints of sweetness from the onions, sharpness from the garlic, and the rich undercurrent of protein your body has been quietly craving. You stir occasionally with a long wooden stick, watching the broth darken. The meat is slowly softening, but it's stubborn. It was likely a working goat, a creature with places to be and opinions about them. Not a pampered animal, so you give it time. While the stew cooks, your mind drifts to a fun, quirky fact. Egyptians occasionally used animal fat for cooking or making candles, though meat itself remained rare enough that many households depended on fish and legumes for protein. Meat was so valuable that even bones were reused for stock or carved into tools. You shift the pot slightly to keep the heat even. The smell now fills the entire courtyard, attracting predictable attention. Your neighbour leans over the low wall. "Is that meat?" they ask, eyes widening slightly. You nod. They exhale like someone overwhelmed by emotional news. "Ah, a lucky day for you." You nod again. They linger a beat too long, so you give them a polite but firm smile. The international language of "no, you cannot have any." The stew bubbles thicker now. You lift a piece of meat with your stick, still a bit tough. You let it simmer longer. Egyptians knew how to coax flavour out of modest ingredients. Patience was the secret spice you never wrote on any recipe. A scholarly debate drifts into your mind while you stir. Historians still argue about how often workers or farmers actually had access to meat, whether weekly, monthly, or only during festivals. Temple records show generous distributions. Village remains suggest something more modest. As with most ancient truths, reality probably varied by region, season, and fortune. Finally, after what feels like an entire pharaoh's reign, the meat gives in. You pull a piece apart with your fingers. It's tender, finally soaked with broth, layered with onion sweetness, infused with herbs. You break off a chunk of bread and scoop a piece of goat with it. The taste is earthy, rich, and deeply satisfying. It's not soft like modern meat. It's chewy, rustic, flavourful. Real food, occasion food. Your second joke rises naturally as you chew. Meat this rare tastes twice as good and takes 10 times as long. You enjoy a few bites in quiet gratitude before portioning the rest for your household. Everyone gets a small share. Nobody feasts, but everyone smiles a little bit extra today. The pot simmers quietly, and you wipe your hands on your tunic. Another stain for the collection. Soon you'll need to turn back to cooking itself. Not the ingredients, not the flavours, but the tools, the ovens, and the fire that make all Egyptian meals possible. Clay ovens that trap heat, open hearths that test your reflexes, and cooking methods so simple they border on genius. The last wisps of steam curl upward from the meat stew as you step back and take in the scene. Bread stacked on a reed mat, vegetables sorted neatly, fruits tucked beneath a cloth, beer bubbling in the corner like a sleepy pet, and now, finally, meat simmered into submission. It's a good day by ancient Egyptian standards. But none of this food would exist without the beating heart of every home's kitchen, the clay oven and its stubborn, unpredictable flames. You turn toward the oven, your tabern, its rounded dome sitting squat and patient in the corner like a sun-baked turtle. It radiates a warmth that's both comforting and slightly menacing. Egyptian ovens were simple in design but demanding in personality, made of clay, fueled by whatever scraps of wood, reeds, or dung you could gather, and always on the verge of being either too hot or not hot enough. There is no middle ground, no dial, no settings, just vibes. You grab a bundle of dried stalks and kneel beside the oven opening. You push the fuel inside and coax the fire with gentle breaths. The flames sputter, then catch, then leap upward dramatically, like they've been waiting all morning for their big moment. One mainstream fact fits perfectly here. Clay ovens like this were essential to Egyptian households, used for baking bread, roasting fish, cooking stews, and heating entire homes during cooler nights. They were multi-purpose, durable, and surprisingly efficient, once you learned how to interpret their moods. The heat intensifies quickly, pushing warm air against your face. You shield your eyes with one hand and reach for a clay pot. Today you're cooking a small vegetable and grain dish, something humble, dependable, and designed to stretch ingredients farther than your stomach sometimes wants to admit. You drizzle a bit of oil, just enough to gloss the bottom of the pot, and toss in chopped onions, garlic, and leeks. The moment they hit the heated clay, they sizzle loudly, releasing a smell so delicious you almost forget that this meal was absolutely designed by necessity. You stir with a wooden stick, letting the vegetables soften, collapse, and merge into a golden, fragrant base. The oven crackles at you, spitting an occasional spark, as if reminding you that while it helps, it also demands respect. Here comes the first joke of the section. Cooking with a clay oven is like trying to negotiate with a toddler holding a torch, rewarding, but slightly terrifying. You slide the clay pot deeper into the oven's opening. Not too far, you're not trying to recreate charcoal, but far enough to let the heat envelop it. A ring of woven reed sits beneath the pot to prevent the bottom from scorching instantly. You adjust it slightly, listening to the symphony of crackles, pops, and soft simmering inside. As everything cooks, you reflect on how essential fire and clay were to this world. Egyptians didn't have metal stoves or controlled flames. They worked with what the land gave them. Clay shaped by hand, hardened in sun and flame, put to work daily without complaint. A quirky historical fact surfaces as you stir the pot. Egyptian cooks sometimes used broken pottery shards as improvised cooking tools. Scrapers, spoons, even small plates. Nothing was wasted. A cracked bowl wasn't trash. It was an opportunity. Some of the best kitchen tools came from the oops pile. You lift the lid to check the stew. The vegetables have melted beautifully, forming a thick, fragrant base. You add a handful of emmer grain, more ancient cousin than modern wheat, and stir until the grains disappear into the mix. They'll swell, soften, and turn the dish into something hearty enough to survive a long afternoon. You push the pot a little deeper into the heat. A bit of smoke curls upward and dances in the air, leaving faint soot on the clay walls. Your eyes sting slightly, not enough to cry, but enough to remind you that Egyptian kitchens didn't exactly come with ventilation plans. Chimneys? Those are the dreams of faraway cultures. You blink through the smoke and make your way to the oven's side, where a flat clay surface is heating. Egyptians sometimes use this surface to make quick flatbreads or warm leftovers. You slap a small piece of dough onto it and watch it puff and blister. The smell is rich, toasty, irresistible. As you watch the bread brown, your mind drifts toward a scholarly debate that has kept researchers arguing over papyrus fragments. Did most households cook indoors with ovens like these, or did many families use shared neighbourhood ovens? Archaeological finds show a mix. Some homes had ovens, others didn't. Some communities preferred communal baking. Maybe it depended on space, clay availability, or how often your household burned things accidentally. The bread finishes quickly, crispy at the edges, soft in the centre. You tear off a piece and let the heat warm your fingers. It tastes smoky but delicious. Simple but satisfying. Exactly what Egyptian food aims to be. The oven crackles again, louder this time, reminding you to check the stew. You pull the pot forward using a folded cloth to protect your hands. Steam bursts out as you lift the lid. The mixture is thick, glossy, and perfectly cooked. You taste a small spoonful, warm, savoury, comforting. The grains are tender, The vegetables sweetened by heat, the herbs subtle. You smile. Even with simple ingredients and unpredictable heat, food like this feels calming. Grounding, nourishing in the deepest way. Your neighbour's voice drifts over the wall. Your kitchen smells good today. You raise your spoon proudly. Clay oven cooperated. Ah, they reply, a rare miracle. You laugh, because it's true. Cooking in ancient Egypt isn't complicated, it's situational. Everything depends on the fire, its strength, its mood, its whims. One day it blesses you with perfection, the next it turns your bread into an accusation. Here's the second joke of the section. Ancient Egyptian ovens don't burn food, they teach humility. You set the pot aside to cool, letting the hearty aroma fill the courtyard. The clay oven slowly settles, the flame shrinking, the heat fading into a warm glow. The fire's loud crackling softens into gentle pops, like a lullaby whispered from the earth itself, and you sit for a moment, appreciating the relationship between heat, clay, and nourishment. Without these simple tools, none of Egypt's daily meals exist. No bread, no fish, no grain stew, no comfort. You wipe your hands and exhale. Soon you'll gather your household, sit on reed mats, and eat from shared bowls in the shade, where meals aren't just food, but community. Because communal eating is coming next. The quiet rituals, shared portions, soft voices, and the simple, grounding rhythm of eating together. The clay oven settles into a gentle glow as you carry the finished dishes toward the shaded corner of your courtyard, where the air is cooler and the ground is softer beneath the woven reed mats. This is where your household always gathers. No table, no chairs, nothing raised or grand. Just mats on the ground and bowls passed between familiar hands. It's simple, warm, and grounding in that uniquely Egyptian way that makes even the quietest meals feel like a ritual. You set the stew down first, then bread, then the small pile of cooked fish, and the precious portion of goat. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasted. Just a modest spread that represents hours of work and centuries of tradition. The smells mingle in the air, herbs, onions, warm bread, roasted meat, the faint sweetness of dates. This isn't a feast, but it smells like comfort. Members of your household gather one by one, siblings, cousins, elders, kids, who still have enough energy to jab one another with reeds when they think adults aren't looking. Everyone settles into their usual spots. Someone sends a playful elbow into your side for being late with the stew. Someone else tosses a breadcrumb at the nearest sibling. It all feels easy. The first mainstream historical fact comes to life as you sit down. Egyptians typically ate in quiet groups, sitting on mats, sharing dishes from common bowls rather than using individual servings. Meals were communal by nature. Everyone reached in, everyone shared, everyone tasted the same flavors that the land provided. You tear off a piece of bread and dip it into the stew, soaking up the thick broth. The bread softens instantly, losing its stubborn density as it absorbs warm vegetable goodness. You take a bite. The stew is richer than you expected, earthy and sweet. The grains inside have plumped up beautifully, carrying the flavor of onions and herbs. A small child to your left mimics you, dunking their bread with dramatic enthusiasm. They drop the entire piece into the stew, gasp at the splash, and stare at the bowl as though the accident was part of a scientific experiment. You fish out the soggy bread chunk for them. They grin and shove the dripping mass into their mouth as if this was their plan all along. That brings your first joke of the section. Even in ancient Egypt, kids eat like tiny, adorable disasters. Conversation is low and gentle. Egyptians didn't chatter loudly during meals unless something extraordinary happened, like spotting a crocodile upstream or a goat launching itself onto a roof. Instead, the quiet hum of chewing, sighs of contentment, and the occasional soft joke fill the air. Someone compliments your cooking. Someone else, in typical sibling fashion, says the stew needed more herbs. You glare at them, but fondly. You pass the goat stew next. It's portioned carefully, because everyone knows there's not enough for seconds. The elder of the household receives the first piece, then passes the bowl to the next person. You finally take your share, a small chunk paired with bread. You chew slowly, appreciating the texture even if it's still a little chewy, despite your heroic simmering efforts. As the meal continues, the second joke arrives naturally. Nothing brings a family together like quietly pretending the meat isn't as tough as it really is. Midway through the meal, someone pulls out the linen cloth covering the figs and dates you collected earlier. A soft murmur passes around the group. This is the highlight of the meal for most people. Fruits are like edible celebrations. The children perk up immediately, eyes wide, as if the fruit basket contains ancient treasure. You hand out figs one by one. Their sweetness softens every expression around you. Even the elders crack small smiles. The fig scent fills the air with something almost floral, mingling with the savoury undertones of the meal. Everyone eats slowly, savouring each bite. You can't help thinking of a quirky historical tidbit. Egyptian workers often received food rations: bread, beer, sometimes onions, occasionally fish. And these rations shaped daily meals more than personal preference ever could. What you eat today is partly determined by the economy, partly by the river, partly by luck. Someone dips a date into the leftover broth, creating a strange flavour combination that they swear by. You raise an eyebrow, they shrug. It's good, they insist. You try it. It is in fact not good. But you pretend it is, because friendship is eternal. As you all eat, you notice the easy choreography of shared meals. Bread moves from hand to hand. Bowls pass fluidly among the group. A child steals a piece of fish from someone's plate. Someone flicks their ear gently in retaliation. Everyone carries on chewing as though this is normal. And, well, it is. A soft breeze flows into the courtyard, stirring the smells of food and carrying the faint chatter from neighbours sharing their own meals. Across the lane, a family is laughing over something. Maybe a joke, maybe an escaped chicken. Domestic life in Egypt is loud in the streets, quiet at the meal, and rich in tiny comforting rhythms. You scoop another bit of stew with your bread and savour it. There's a moment of stillness, that satisfied quiet that comes when the stomach is full but not heavy. People lean back. Someone stretches lazily. Someone else reaches for more bread out of habit rather than hunger. And with the fullness comes a brief thought, one of those internal reflections that sneaks in during quiet meals. Historians still argue whether Egyptians typically ate their largest meal at midday or in the evening. Some evidence suggests large noon meals among labourers. Others point to dinner being the main event. Today, your meal feels like both, hearty and perfectly timed. Eventually, people begin rising one by one, washing their fingers with a splash of water, brushing crumbs from their tunics, returning to their tasks. A few linger in the shade, letting the heat settle harmlessly around them. You stay seated a moment longer, soaking it all in, the warmth, the simplicity, the sense of belonging forged through shared bowls and quiet voices. But soon your mind shifts to the rhythms beyond your home, temple rations, worker payments, offerings to gods, and the way food isn't just nourishment, it's currency, reward, and spiritual connection. Because next you step into the world of temple rations and worker perks, the food that keeps Egypt's massive workforce moving. You rise slowly from the reed mat, brushing off crumbs that immediately cling right back, as if ancient Egyptian bread has separation anxiety. The courtyard smells warm and lived in, filled with the soft afterglow of a shared meal. But as your household drifts back to daily tasks, your thoughts turn towards something bigger than lunch or home cooking, something that shapes the entire rhythm of Egyptian society: rations, payments, food as currency. Because in ancient Egypt, getting fed wasn't just about survival, it was about your role in the machine of the kingdom. You step out into the bright midday sun, heading toward the edge of the village where workers gather to receive their daily staples. This is where the true fuel of Egypt's giant projects, temples, irrigation canals, tombs, quarries, gets distributed. The Nile may be the backbone of the land, but grain rations are the backbone of the people. As you approach, you hear chatter drifting across the dusty clearing. Someone jokes loudly about extra beer today. Someone else has already decided that today's ration is unfair before even seeing it. It's comforting in a chaotic, predictable way. A long wooden bench supports baskets of emigraine and jars of thick beer. Temple scribes stand nearby with reed pens tucked behind their ears, ready to record distributions with dramatic importance. Their papyrus scrolls flap slightly in the breeze, as if trying to escape before being written on again. A mainstream historical fact fits perfectly here. Egyptian workers, especially those labouring on state or temple projects, were often paid not in coins but in food rations: bread, grain, oil, and beer, sometimes fish, occasionally dried figs. Money existed, but food was the real currency for most people's daily lives. You get in line, adjusting your basket under your arm. A scribe looks up, squints at you like you personally wronged him, then nods and dips his pen. Next to him, a worker hands you a generous scoop of grain. You feel the weight settle into your basket. Warm, familiar, essential. Grain isn't glamorous, but it's dependable. It fills your belly, your oven, your days. Then comes the real treat, your beer ration. The worker pours the thick, yeasty brew into your clay jar. It glugs out slowly, like it's having second thoughts about leaving its container. You smile. It's not refreshing in the modern sense, but it's fuel, caloric, hydrating after boiling, gently intoxicating if you drink enough. Behind you, someone mutters, "This batch tastes better than yesterday's." Another replies, "That's because yesterday's tasted like disappointment." You grin. These are your people. You take your basket and jug to the side and sit for a moment beneath a scraggly palm. The shade isn't perfect, but it's enough. Workers gather nearby, comparing their portions, speculating on upcoming festival feasts, and complaining about the scribes, because complaining about scribes is timeless. Here comes your first joke of the section. The real reason Egyptians built big monuments was to justify hiring more scribes, who would then spend all day writing complaints about bad beer. You sip your ration straight from the jar. It's warm, thick, and tastes faintly like bread forgot how to be bread. But it hits your stomach with comforting heaviness. It's the perfect thing to keep you standing through long hot shifts. A quirky historical tidbit drifts into your mind. Excavations at Deir el-Medina, the village of tomb builders, show workers sometimes received bonus rations of beer, fish, or even vegetables during periods of intense labour. Imagine getting overtime pay in onions and enthusiasm. You lean back and watch a group of workers nearby discuss the upcoming festival. Something about offerings, extra bread, and maybe even roasted goose if the temple is feeling generous. Goose isn't something you'll see at home anytime soon, but festivals change the rules. Food appears like magic, generosity surges, and for one glorious day you might eat something so rich it rewires your personality. The scribes continue their ritual of marking names, counting jars, frowning at nothing, and occasionally stopping to dip their pens again. They wield grain like accountants wield spreadsheets. Ration mistakes can ruin a household, so these measurements matter more than modern people often realize. You stand and walk slowly toward the temple granary itself, a tall mud brick structure with thick walls and a cool interior. Workers hurry in and out carrying baskets, their sandals slapping softly against the ground. The granary is enormous, like a giant sleeping beast made of clay. Inside, the air grows cooler, smelling faintly of dust, grain, and the sweet tang of fermentation. You peek inside. Rows of storage pits hold mountains of grain. Clay jars line the walls marked with symbols indicating beer or oil. The sight is oddly comforting. This is the heart of your community. This is security. Knowing these stores exist means knowing you won't starve during the dry seasons. Historians still debate. Your scholarly debate requirement arrives. Whether rations were fixed for all workers or varied wildly based on skill, status, or even the whims of supervisors. Some preparers show strict measurements, others show inconsistencies that spark endless arguments in museum basements. Today, you get what you get, and it's enough. You head home with your grain and beer, feeling lighter despite the load. People nod as you pass. A woman balances two enormous jars on her shoulders like she's performing a circus act. A child runs by holding a chunk of bread like it's treasure. Somewhere, a donkey brays as if announcing its own dissatisfaction with the universe. Back in your courtyard, you set the rations down. The grain will become tomorrow's bread. The beer will become tonight's comfort. The cycle continues. And tomorrow, when festival, drums echo across the fields and temple priests prepare their offerings. You'll get to witness something rare. A day when food becomes more than nourishment. It becomes ceremony, celebration, and connection with the divine. Because next comes feast days and sacred offerings, where even simple ingredients transform into something extraordinary. The afternoon sun hangs high, flattening shadows and warming every mud brick wall until they glow like burnished gold. But today, the heat doesn't bother you. Not when there's a festival brewing, one of those sacred days when the village hums with anticipation The temples prepare offerings, and food becomes more than survival. It becomes celebration, gratitude, and spectacle. You step out into the lane and immediately sense the shift. People move with purpose, carrying baskets, bundles of reeds, jars, and crates. Children skip around with the wild energy of tiny festival sprites. Even the goats look unusually hopeful, though you sincerely hope they're not part of the feast menu today. You join the flow, heading toward the temple complex, following the scent of roasting barley and sweet-smelling incense drifting on the warm breeze. A soft hum of voices rises and falls, prayers, greetings, gossip, and the unmistakable sound of someone scolding a donkey for refusing to participate in the festivities. As you approach the temple entrance, the walls loom tall, whitewashed and gleaming in the sunlight. Painted reliefs tell stories of gods, kings, floods, and harvests. Today, the priests move about like a flock of solemn birds, coordinating offerings for both mortals and deities. A mainstream historical fact lands gently here. Feast days in ancient Egypt involved temple offerings of bread, beer, fruits, meats, and incense, much of which was later redistributed to workers and locals as sacred leftovers called reversion offerings. This was one of the rare times everyday people tasted richer foods. You slip inside the courtyard, where a large gathering of villagers and workers stands watching the preparations. The air is thick with scent, honey cakes baking on hot stones, onions roasting, beer fermenting in huge ceremonial jars. Priests chant rhythmic phrases that echo through the stone halls, their voices weaving into the smell of incense until everything feels dreamlike. A young acolyte carries a tray of small, intricately shaped breads, some formed like birds, others like tiny sacred symbols. Egyptians loved symbolic bread, especially during rituals. You stare at a loaf shaped like a tiny cow and wonder if it's polite to eat something that cute. You stand near a group of women preparing large platters of offerings. They slice figs, arrange dates in spiraling patterns, and drizzle honey on barley cakes until they glisten beautifully. A child nearby reaches for one and gets gently smacked on the hand. Festival offerings come before festival snacking. One of the older women smiles at you and hands you a small fig to taste. For helping carry offerings yesterday, she says. You thank her warmly and take a bite. It's sweet, soft, fragrant. And here comes your first joke of the section. Festival figs taste exactly 47% better simply because they are festival figs. Nearby, a priest lifts a large clay jar and pours golden beer into a ceremonial basin. The smell wafts upward, yeasty, sweet, comforting. Beer was sacred to many gods, including Hathor, and today it will flow freely. Workers will definitely leave this event slightly wobblier than they arrived. You step further into the courtyard just as the animal offerings arrive. A small group of goats and cattle are led through the archway. You follow at a respectful distance. Not all of these animals will become food. Some will be symbolically offered, others will be prepared as part of the feast. A quirky historical tidbit fits perfectly here. Temple feasts often included roasted goose, beef, or lamb, foods far too expensive for everyday meals, and afterward, priests redistributed portions to workers, scribes, and villagers. The gods were generous, or perhaps the priests were in a particularly cooperative mood. You find a place near the shade of a tall column and watch as offerings are arranged on a low altar. Pyramids of bread, bowls of beer, clusters of grapes, heaps of dates, cuts of meat marinated in herbs, and freshly roasted fish brought from the Nile early this morning. The colours alone feel festive. Golden bread, deep red meats, glossy fruits, shimmering jars of honey. Priests chant, incense burns, sunlight falls across statues of gods, illuminating their faces with a warm glow. Everything feels both sacred and familiar, like stepping into the heartbeat of your community. Then comes the scholarly debate requirement for this section. Historians still argue whether the majority of the offerings were actually consumed by priests or redistributed widely among the community. Temple inscriptions tell one story, ration records tell another. As usual, the truth probably sits somewhere in the middle, depending on the temple, the time period, and how hungry the priests were. You feel a nudge at your shoulder. A friend whispers, "They're almost done, stay close, they'll share the bread first." You smile. You know how this works. You've stood in this courtyard before. After the offerings are blessed, sanctified, and symbolically consumed by the gods, they become communal food, shared by the people who uphold the land, the river, and the labor that keeps Egypt alive. The chanting ends. A quiet settles over the crowd, then movement, priests lifting baskets, workers stepping forward, elders guiding children to the front. Blessed bread is hand-delivered to waiting palms. Honey cakes appear. A platter of roasted beef is carried toward the workers, steam curling from its surface. You take your small share, a warm piece of ceremonial bread shaped like a tiny offering. Loaf. It tastes dense, simple, but deeply satisfying. You close your eyes as you chew, letting the flavors settle in your chest like warmth. Here comes your second joke of the section. Nothing tastes more divine than food you weren't expecting to receive. People gather in small groups to enjoy their shares. Bread dipped in honey, roasted onions passed around, fruit eaten slowly to make it last longer. Even the scribes look relaxed today, holding cups of beer and smiling instead of glaring at their papyri. You look around at the celebration, the mingling smells of roasted meat, fresh bread, incense and sun-warmed fruits. Temple drums begin to beat softly, echoing across the courtyard. Children dance. Older workers sit and laugh. Someone plays a flute off key and nobody cares. This is Egypt at its most joyful, simple, shared, sacred. And as the festival warmth settles around you, your thoughts turn to something more practical. The long work days ahead and the foods you'll pack to get you through them. Simple rations shaped by necessity and long hours under the sun. Next, you'll walk through a typical workday's food. The snacks, the small meals, the humble bites that keep you moving from sunrise to sunset. The festival drums linger in your ears as you walk away from the temple courtyard, your belly warm with blessed bread, and your heart carrying that rare feeling of being part of something larger than chores, heat, and daily survival. But there's no festival tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. Most days in ancient Egypt aren't celebrations, most days are work days, and on work days food becomes something different. It's no longer ceremonial or communal or symbolic, it's practical, durable, portable. It needs to survive the heat, the dust, the distance, and the 6 different ways your day can go wrong between sunrise and noon. You head home, grab your small carrying basket, worn, patched, and smelling faintly of onions, and begin assembling what any Egyptian worker knows well, the daily rations. Nothing fancy, nothing fragile, just enough fuel to get you through long hours under the sun. First, the bread. Not the soft, festival kind bread from yesterday. This is your regular, no-nonsense, dense loaf. The kind of bread that has the personality of a brick and the durability of one too. You slice it in half with a flint blade. Well, more like saw it in half, and tuck both pieces into the basket. Next comes the onion. Always an onion. Egyptians treated onions the way modern workers treat coffee. Essential, energizing, and available everywhere. You pick one that's firm and bright-skinned, giving it a quick rinse before adding it to the basket. And here comes your first joke of the section. If ancient Egyptians had lunchboxes, they'd be filled with exactly 1 onion and 0 apologies. You add a few cloves of garlic, because garlic doesn't wilt, doesn't spoil, and doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It's the powerhouse of the lunch world. Some workers even rubbed raw garlic on wounds or sore muscles. Not that you'll be doing that, unless the day demands it. Then a small hunk of dried fish. Salty, tough, and determined to remain food no matter how long it's been stored. Dried fish was one of Egypt's earliest take-it-on-the-road snacks, and while the taste is an acquired one, it keeps you full. You wrap it in a scrap of linen to keep it from making your basket smell like a very determined river spirit. You check your beer jar next. The brew you started yesterday has settled beautifully, forming a thick, bubbly liquid that tastes somewhere between grain, yeast, and quiet resignation. You pour some into a smaller travel jar, enough for a few refreshing sips, but not enough to make you wobble while handling tools. And that brings you to the quirky historical tidbit. Egyptian workers often drank beer throughout the day because it provided hydration, calories, and safe fluid intake all at once, especially when clean water wasn't a guarantee. Day beer wasn't meant to get you drunk. It was meant to keep you alive. You sling the basket over your shoulder and make your way toward the fields. The sun is already bright, turning the landscape a warm, shimmering gold. Workers gather slowly, Farmers preparing plows, laborers tightening ropes, builders organizing tools. Everyone carries food. Everyone's basket looks more or less like yours. The first hours of labor pass steadily. Heat builds. Sweat beads across your brow. Reed mats rustle as workers stretch muscles and brace for more hours ahead. A scribe walks by taking attendance, looking entirely too clean for someone outdoors. By mid-morning, your stomach rumbles. You wipe your forehead and find a scrap of shade, an acacia tree that offers just enough cover to pretend it's helping, and settle down to eat. You pull out your bread, break off a chunk and bite into it. It's dry, dense, absolutely determined to make your jaw work for every calorie, but you welcome it. You've been grinding, hauling and bending for hours. Food like this fills you up fast. You take your onion, peel it with your fingers, and eat a piece raw. The flavor hits you instantly, sweet at first, then sharp enough to make your eyes water. You chase it with a sip of beer. The bitterness softens the onion's bite. A coworker plops down beside you, pulls out the exact same meal, and offers an extra garlic clove. You exchange it for a strip of your dried fish. Ancient Egyptian lunchtime is a barter system, a quiet economy of tiny favors and edible trades. Here comes your second joke of the section. Egyptian workday cuisine is basically trading increasingly strong-smelling ingredients until everyone smells exactly the same. You chew your dried fish. It's salty and tough, but satisfying in its own rugged way. The sun warms your shoulders. The wind carries the faint sound of distant birds and the occasional bray of an overly dramatic donkey. Around you, other workers eat in near silence. Just the sounds of chewing, quiet sighs, and the rustle of reeds. As you finish your meal, you take a long drink from your beer jar. It's warm, a little tangy, and perfectly soothing in the mid-morning heat. The grains floating inside your drink count as food, technically, so congratulations, you're having a liquid snack. You wipe your hands, dust off your tunic, and stand. The break is short. The workday stretches long, but your stomach is steady now, your limbs less shaky, your mind refocused. Food doesn't need to be exciting, it needs to be enough. As you walk back to your task, the scholarly debate for the section swims into your thoughts. Historians still argue about whether Egyptian workers consistently received midday meals from supervisors or relied entirely on their own packed food. Some records suggest employers provided lunch during major projects. Others show evidence of self-packed rations. Per usual, the truth likely shifted by geography, era, and management competence. You glance at the sun. It's shifting now, telling you the day is moving on. There's work to finish, tools to lift, fields to tend, and food. Simple, practical, persistent food to keep you going until the sun dips and dinner calls you home. But the day isn't done, and neither is the ancient challenge of keeping food from spoiling in a land that's equal parts blessing and brutality. Next, you face the old Egyptian struggle, preserving food without luxury, drying, salting, smoking, and turning the desert's heat into your reluctant ally. The afternoon sun slides toward that heavy golden angle, where every shadow stretches long and every surface radiates heat like a memory. You return home after your long workday, your arms tired, your shoulders sore, your tunic plastered to your back with that special blend of Nile sweat and self-respect. The moment you step into your courtyard, you're reminded of a challenge that ancient Egyptians face every single day, and that most modern people forget even exists. How do you keep food from spoiling when your entire world is one giant oven? Egypt is not subtle. It's hot, dry, and aggressively committed to ruining anything perishable unless you act quickly and cleverly. So, as soon as you drop your work basket, you turn to the corner of the courtyard where your household keeps its modest food storage. A couple of clay jars, a woven basket, and a small raised shelf designed to keep rodents from turning your pantry into a midnight buffet. You start with the leftovers from earlier, some bread, a few onions, a handful of dates, a bit of grain stew. Bread keeps well on its own. It becomes harder, denser, and eventually physically weaponized, but still edible. Onions and garlic will survive the apocalypse, but stew, meat, fresh vegetables, good luck. Here comes your first joke. Ancient Egyptians didn't preserve food because they were clever. They preserved food because the sun was trying to kill their groceries. You gather the items that need attention, a bit of uncooked fish you didn't use this morning, a few leftover leeks and scraps of goat too small to stew. You know better than to leave them sitting out. In this heat, they'll turn into biological experiments by sundown, so you begin with the simplest, oldest preservation method of them all, drying. You slice the fish thin and lay the strips on a woven mat propped at an angle to catch maximum sunlight. The desert heat does most of the work, drawing out moisture until the fish becomes stiff, leathery, and practically immortal. This is how Egyptian fishermen turned their catch into something that could last weeks, or at least until the family goat got into it. A mainstream historical fact roots itself in the moment. Drying, salting, and sun-curing were the primary methods ancient Egyptians used to preserve fish, meat, and produce. Egypt's climate practically begs you to dry things. It's the world's most intense dehydrator. Next, you pick up your small jar of salt, carefully rationed, and sprinkle a thin layer over the goat scraps. Not enough to waste, but enough to discourage spoilage. You rub the salt gently into the meat, then set the strips on a pottery shard under partial shade. Salt plus dry air equals survival. You turn to the leeks and trim off wilted edges. These can be dried too. You slice them lengthwise and spread them on a reed mat. Once dried, they work as flavour in stews or bread. No part wasted. This brings you to the quirky fact of the section. Egyptians sometimes mixed dried vegetables into dough to create nutrient-packed breads that travelled well on long journeys or work expeditions. Think of it as the ancient world's attempt at multi-grain loaves, minus the fancy packaging and the $8 price tag. As you lay out the last leek strips, your neighbour pokes their head over the low wall. "Drying things again?" they ask, with the tone of someone who's asking whether you've had your morning coffee yet. You nod. "Good. The heat today will cook anything left out." You nod again, because you didn't need the reminder. The neighbour disappears. Their goat bleats ominously. You make a mental note to check your drying racks frequently. Goats don't respect personal boundaries or laws. You move on to storage, stacking bread onto the raised shelf, sealing your grain jar with mud, and loosely covering the fig basket with linen. Keeping figs cool is a losing battle, but the cloth buys you a few extra hours before they turn mushy. Then you check your beer jar. Fermentation is ongoing, bubbles rising lazily through the thick liquid. Beer doesn't spoil easily, but the flavour changes dramatically with temperature. Today's batch smells fine. Tomorrow, it may smell like regret. Ancient Egyptian cooks learned quickly to drink beer while it was good. You take a sip just to test. Warm, thick, surprisingly refreshing. You set the jar aside. While you work, your thoughts wander toward the scholarly debate that pops up whenever historians look at ancient storage pits and granaries. Did most families store food for long-term survival, or did they rely almost entirely on daily rations and fresh preparation? Evidence points both ways. Some households had impressive storage. Others seem to have lived very day-to-day. The answer probably shifts with the Nile's flood cycle. In good years, storage. In lean years, pray and improvise. Back in the courtyard, your dried fish strips curl slightly in the heat. The goat strips stiffen faster than you expect. It's like the sun took personal offence at your ingredients and decided to speedrun the process. You gather everything and move them carefully to a high shelf in the shade. Tomorrow, they'll be dry enough to store in a jar. Here comes your second joke of the section. The sun in Egypt is both your worst enemy and your most reliable sous chef. You wipe your forehead. The heat sticks to your skin like a second tunic. But your food is safe for now, stored, protected. You exhale slowly, letting the rhythm of small chores settle your mind. When your household arrives home later, they'll see the mats of drying leeks and fish, the racks of bread, the jars lined along the wall. They'll nod. Because this is the rhythm of Egyptian life. Simple, repetitive, necessary, and weirdly comforting. But even with all this effort, you know something else equally true. Not everyone in Egypt has to think this hard about preservation. There's a class above, you, people whose kitchens don't look like yours, people who eat ingredients you've only smelled once or twice, people who season their meals with imported luxuries carried across deserts and seas. And soon you'll get a rare glimpse into that world. The tastes of the wealthy, the spices, pastries, and indulgent foods far beyond everyday life. You finish arranging the last of the dried fish on the shelf, wipe your hands on your already overworked tunic, and pause. The courtyard hums with its usual rhythms, neighbours calling to one another, goats plotting their next crime, the distant slosh of someone scrubbing laundry. This is your world, simple, predictable, humble. But not all Egyptians live this way. Not every household is counting onions, drying fish, and begging the sun to behave. Some Egyptians, priests, nobles, overseers, administrators, and the well-connected, experience food in a completely different universe. A universe you usually only see glimpses of when passing near the estates or temples. Today, though, you have a reason to visit. A small delivery, a favour owed, and a chance to see food that doesn't need to be dried into submission to survive. You sling your small basket over your arm and walk toward the edge of the village, where the larger homes sit behind decorated walls. Mud brick, yes, but plastered, painted, and far more elegant than your own. Palms sway overhead, incense drifts from windows, and everything smells richer. A servant opens a gate and nods you inside. The moment you step across the threshold, the air changes. Cooler, less dusty, and the smell. Oh, the smell. Meat, real meat, spices, butter, honey, fresh baked pastries. You inhale so hard you nearly choke on admiration. Inside the courtyard, women and servants bustle around a large table overflowing with ingredients you rarely see in your lifetime. The wealthy don't eat differently because they're greedy. They eat differently because they can afford both time and luxury, two things working Egyptians treat like mythical creatures. Your eyes immediately land on a bowl of roasted duck, the skin glossy with fat crisped perfectly. Beside it sits a platter of gazelle cuts, seasoned with what smells suspiciously like imported cinnamon. You don't say a word, but your stomach whispers, "Is this real?" A mainstream historical fact fits right into this awe. Wealthy Egyptians had access to domesticated and wild meats: duck, goose, pigeon, beef, gazelle, often prepared with imported spices and sweeteners far beyond the reach of common households. A servant gestures toward a tray you're meant to deliver. Fine linen, dyed a pale blue, embroidered with lotus patterns. You set it down and keep your eyes, mostly on your task. But the food is impossible to ignore. On another table, a cook mixes dough with actual milk fat, rare in your world, and shapes pastries filled with dates, honey, and nuts. They smell intoxicating, the kind of smell that could start wars or mend feuds. You watch her fold the dough with expert speed, pinch the edges just so, and slide the pastries onto a tray that will be baked in a large, elegant clay oven. You realise this moment triggers your first joke of the section. The wealthy don't just cook food, they hire people whose grandmothers were probably professional flavour wizards. You move closer to another table, where a man sprinkles something reddish-brown onto roasted vegetables. You lean in subtly. "Is that cinnamon?" he confirms with a nod. "Imported, expensive, worth more than half the sandals in the village." Nearby, someone pours wine from a slender amphora into tiny cups. Wine, not beer, flows here, and not the sharp homemade grape brew that sometimes tastes like regret. This is well-aged wine, aromatic and delicate. A quirky historical tidbit slips perfectly into your thoughts. Elite Egyptians often flavoured wine with herbs, honey, mandrake, or resin, turning it into early versions of spiced or fortified wine. Meanwhile, your version of flavoured beverage is beer that accidentally absorbed the scent of onions from sitting too close to the basket. You wander toward the kitchen area, bigger, cooler, and so organised it feels like another world entirely. Large pottery jars hold oils you can't afford. Wooden bowls hold spices you can barely pronounce, like coriander, cumin, and fenugreek, in quantities that make your eyes widen. Then you see something that makes you briefly forget how to breathe. Imported dates so large and glossy they look like jewels. A servant pops one into her mouth while checking a pot. She smiles with the slow confidence of someone who has never known what it's like to beg a dried fig to last 2 more days. You exhale quietly, and there it is, the scholarly debate for this section. Did wealthy Egyptians eat drastically different diets compared to commoners, or did they simply enjoy more variety and better quality of the same basic foods? Some researchers argue elites ate entirely different meals. Others say the difference was more about frequency, quantity, and seasoning. The evidence is mixed. Burials, inscriptions, kitchen remains all tell pieces of the story. But standing here in this wealthy courtyard, you know one thing for certain. Their food smells like victory. A servant offers you a tiny pastry as thanks for your delivery. You hesitate for politeness, then accept before the universe changes its mind. You bite into it. Soft dough, warm honey, crushed nuts, and a hint of spice that tastes like whispering luxury. You nearly weep. Your second joke arrives without invitation. Rich people food is so good it immediately convinces you you've been eating air your whole life. You finish the pastry, savouring the aftertaste for as long as possible. The servant thanks you again. You nod respectfully and step back into the bright sunlight. On your walk home, the smells cling to you. Duck fat, honey, cinnamon. But your own courtyard greets you with the comfort of familiarity. Dried leeks, cooling bread, the faint smell of beer bubbling in its jar. You smile. Their food might be extraordinary, but yours sustains you just the same. And tonight, as the sun dips low and the sky shifts into soft red, you'll face the stranger side of ancient Egyptian food. The superstitions, remedies, and beliefs that turned ordinary ingredients into magical or mystical tools. You step back into your courtyard, the faint echoes of cinnamon and honey still clinging to your senses like a dream you're not quite ready to wake from. But as the luxurious smells fade, something else rises to fill the gap. Something older, stranger, woven deeply into the everyday life of ancient Egypt. Belief. Not in the dramatic temple-engraved way, though that certainly exists, but in the quiet superstitions that creep into kitchens, the whispered remedies passed from mother to daughter, the foods that double as talismans. Because in Egypt, food doesn't just nourish the body, it protects, it soothes, it heals, and sometimes it terrifies you enough that you eat it just in case. You set your basket down and step toward a corner where your household keeps small bundles of herbs, garlic bulbs tied with string, leek stalks braided loosely, onions hanging like fragrant lanterns. At first glance, they look like food storage, but you know better. Garlic in Egypt is more than garlic. A neighbour walks past your gate and nods at the drying bulbs. Good protection, they say casually. You nod back because that's simply a fact everyone accepts. Here comes your first mainstream fact of the section. Ancient Egyptians believed garlic and onions had protective properties, not only against illness, but against evil spirits and bad luck. Priests carried onions in ceremonies, labourers wore garlic for strength, even mummies sometimes received onions over their eyes as magical shields. You lift a bulb of garlic from the string. It's firm, papery, slightly pungent even from a distance. You rub it gently between your palms. The smell clings instantly. A child in your household wanders over. Are you making stew? Not today, you reply. Then why garlic? You lean in, because it keeps the unseen things away. The child nods with absolute seriousness and retreats, clutching a piece of bread as if it's part of the ritual too. And that leads into your first joke. Ancient Egyptians didn't fear evil spirits. They just feared running out of garlic. You hang the garlic back up and turn toward the onions. One sits on a small plate sliced open to reveal its bright concentric rings, perfect circles layered like a tiny golden labyrinth. Egyptians associated those rings with eternity, protection, the cyclical rise of the sun. There's a reason onions show up in tombs, offerings, medicine, and protective rituals. A reason they're tied around wrists during festivals. A reason people murmur, small phrases when they're cut open, is not just food, it's symbolism made edible. You pick one up, inhale its sharp scent and place it next to the hearth, for protection, for comfort, for tradition. Next, you reach for a small jar of honey, the remnants of the precious jar you opened earlier. Honey is sweetness, yes, but also medicine. Egyptians use it for wounds, burns, stomach aches, clogged sinuses, and even to soothe nightmares when dabbed on certain amulets. A quirky historical fact drifts into place. Egyptian medical papyri list honey in hundreds of remedies, from infections to digestive problems to settling a troubled spirit. It wasn't just a sweetener, it was a cure. You open the jar and scoop a tiny bit with your finger. Sticky, golden, comforting. But you're not eating it. Today you're mixing a simple remedy. Honey, warm water, and a pinch of ground coriander for a family member who's been coughing all afternoon. You stir the mixture in a clay cup until the honey dissolves. It smells earthy and soothing. You hand it to them, and they drink quietly. Whether it's science, superstition, or both, you don't question it. Meanwhile, someone else in your household has tied a small strip of linen around a pot of dough, not to secure it, to bless it. They murmur something about keeping bad winds from rising in the bread. You smile softly, not because you believe it will change the bread, but because belief shapes mood, and mood shapes meals. You move to the other side of the courtyard, where dried herbs rest in little bundles. Dill for digestion, fenugreek for breathing, fennel for warding off sadness. A small pot of natron sits nearby, used mostly for cleaning, but occasionally mixed with herbs to create protective paste for the doorway. Not quite magical, but magical enough. Now comes your scholarly debate for the section. Historians still argue whether these food-based superstitions were widespread across all households or concentrated within certain classes or regions. Medicine, magic, religion, they blur everywhere in Egyptian life, making it hard to separate practical remedies from spiritual ones. Some records suggest common practice, others point to more elite contexts. As usual, the truth lived in kitchens, not on papyrus. You step back and survey your courtyard. Food here isn't just food, it's comfort, it's protection, it's ritual. Your garlic bundles sway slightly in the breeze. The onion on the plate glows faintly in the late-day sun. A pot of boiling water sends tiny spirals of steam into the air like whispered prayers. Here comes your second joke. Between honey cures, garlic charms, and onion rings of protection, ancient Egyptians were basically inventing the world's first edible security system. The sky begins to shift now, soft pinks and oranges gathering at the horizon. You feel the day winding down, easing into that quiet time before evening meals and cool night breezes. Food in Egypt may be simple, but its meanings run deep. It feeds the body, guards the spirit, and anchors you to traditions older than the pyramids themselves. And as twilight settles, your thoughts drift toward the next part of your day. The nighttime kitchen, the slow reheating of leftovers, the glow of embers, and the comfort of eating as the desert air finally begins to cool. The sky deepens into a soft blend of rose and gold as the last stretch of sunlight dissolves behind the mud brick rooftops. Evening in ancient Egypt arrives not with a rush, but with a slow, gentle exhale, an easing of heat, of noise, of movement. The courtyard that blazed all day now holds a comfortable warmth, like a stone heated just enough to soothe tired hands. You breathe it in, the air feels softer, fuller, calmer. It's time for the evening kitchen, the quiet one, where meals aren't about survival or speed, but about winding down and making the most of what's left from the day. You step into the kitchen area. The clay oven you used earlier is no longer roaring. Instead, it glows faintly with sleepy embers, radiating just enough heat to rewarm food without demanding your full attention. It's a familiar, comforting sight, your nighttime co-chef. You gather what remains from earlier, a bit of grain stew, a few roasted vegetables, a piece of fish saved from midday, half a loaf of bread that could probably survive a natural disaster, and a small bowl with exactly 3 figs left inside, which the children swore they didn't touch, despite the obvious fig smudges on their faces. You smile. Leftovers in ancient Egypt are not glamorous, but they're precious. Nothing gets thrown away. Every scrap is repurposed, reheated, soaked, stretched, or turned into something new. You start with the stew. It's thick now, cool and gelled slightly like it's trying to become architecture. You scoop it into a small pot and place it near the embers. Slowly, the heat loosens it. The smell rises again. Earthy, savoury, soft. Comfort in clay form. While you stir, your thoughts nudge toward a mainstream fact of the night. Egyptians often ate lighter meals in the evening, usually made from leftovers or simple fresh produce. Bread, vegetables, stew remnants, and the occasional treat if the day allowed. Heavy meals belonged to midday. Evenings were for calming the body. The fish comes next. You place the small piece on a flat pottery shard near the embers. It sizzles gently, releasing a faint savoury scent. The skin crisps again, not as dramatically as earlier, but enough to bring the flavour back to life. Your first joke of the section sneaks in with perfect timing. Ancient Egyptian leftovers aren't just reheated, they're resurrected. Someone from your household appears with a jug of water and pours a small amount into a cup, then hands it to you. You thank them. The water is cool, not cold, never cold, but refreshing. You take a sip, feeling the dust of the day leave your throat. Nearby, 2 children argue quietly about who gets the bigger piece of bread tonight. You break off a piece for each, then an extra for peacekeeping purposes, because no one wants negotiations to break down over bread that can double as a building block. A breeze slips into the courtyard, stirring the linen cloth draped over the fig bowl. One fig rolls out. You catch it before it hits the ground, and your second joke arrives. Even fruit tries to escape when the kids are involved. You set the fig aside, saving it for later. There's something soothing about saving one small sweet thing for the end of a long day. The stew simmers gently, sending little bubbles to the surface. You stir again, watching as vegetables soften back into a warm, thick mixture. You tear bread into small chunks and toss them into the pot so they can soften, transforming stubborn leftovers into something cozy. Across the courtyard, your neighbour lights an oil lamp. Soft yellow glow spills across the lane. The smell of their dinner drifts through the air. Garlic, onions, something stewed with herbs. You smile. The evening chorus of kitchens begins. Quiet simmering, murmured voices, distant laughter, and the occasional chicken shouting a complaint at the universe. Your mind wanders to a quirky historical tidbit. Archaeologists have found evidence that some Egyptians reheated leftovers by placing pots near embers or burying dishes slightly in warm ash, turning the ground itself into a slow cooker. Simple, clever, effective. In a world without metal pots or precise stoves, Egyptians mastered resourcefulness. You check your fish, done. You check your stew, perfect. You slice a leftover leek, toss it into the pot, and let it wilt and sweeten in the warmth. When everything's ready, you sit down on the reed mat again, placing the pot beside you. The night air cools your skin. The stars begin their slow reveal overhead. Your household gathers silently, each person settling into their usual spot. You serve the stew first, ladled into shared bowls. The warmth travels through your fingers. You dip bread into the bowl, letting it soak until it becomes soft, warm, and tender. The bite melts in your mouth, filling you with a kind of peace only evening meals can give. You pass the fish next. Small portions, but hearty. Someone hums quietly. Someone else yawns so dramatically that even the donkey outside seems impressed. You savour your food slowly. Each bite feels earned. The day was long, the chores endless, the heat relentless. But this moment, steady, quiet, warm, makes it all feel balanced. A scholarly debate drifts into your thoughts as you eat. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians typically ate their evening meals indoors or outdoors. Many homes had simple interior spaces, but courtyards offered airflow, light, and comfort. Cooking often happened outside, but eating sometimes shifted with seasons. The archaeological evidence is mixed, leaving room for interpretation. Tonight, the courtyard is perfect. A soft breeze, a dim sky, voices gently murmuring. Someone laughs quietly at a private joke. A warm bowl in your hands. You finish your meal with the last fig, the one that tried to roll away earlier. It's sweet, soft, and wonderfully simple. The night deepens, lamps flicker, people murmur their last thoughts before sleep. The village settles into a hush that feels almost sacred. And in this lull, you feel the truth of Egyptian evenings. Food isn't just nourishment, it's transition. From heat to cool, from labour to rest, from noise to stillness. Soon, you'll lie down on your reed mat. The night breeze will drift in through cracked shutters, and your belly will be warm with simple food that's carried your entire day. But before sleep, one more thought flickers through you. The simple life you live is universal, shared across households, fields, and generations. And tomorrow morning, after the embers cool and the sun rises, the cycle of eating and working and sharing begins all over again. The night settles fully now, blanketing your little courtyard in a hush so soft it almost feels like fabric. Woven from cool desert air, distant river sounds, and the gentle murmur of families finishing their chores. The stars above you glitter with that sharp Egyptian clarity, each one flickering like a tiny oil lamp hung in the heavens. Somewhere a dog barks once, half-heartedly, then gives up. Even the insects seem tired. Your household moves slowly, with that unmistakable end-of-day heaviness. Clay bowls are rinsed with a splash of water. Reed mats are straightened. Children argue in whispers, far too tired to commit to a full drama. You wander back toward your sleeping area. A simple corner with a reed mat, a linen blanket, and the kind of welcome coolness that only appears after sunset finally stops being angry. You settle onto the mat, stretching your legs out and feeling the last warmth of the meal still sitting comfortably in your belly. Is not a heavy fullness, not the festival feast kind. No, this is the gentle fullness of grain stew and reheated fish, of warm bread softened in broth, of simple food prepared without hurry. The kind of meal that doesn't excite you, doesn't overwhelm you, but quietly reassures you. Because tonight, like every night, you feel the truth of this ancient land. Egypt isn't built on extravagance. It's built on simplicity, steady, humble, nourishing simplicity. You close your eyes briefly, letting the night sounds settle around you. The soft squeak of a pottery lid, the rustle of palm fronds swaying, the rhythmic slosh of the Nile far in the distance. These are the lullabies of ancient Egypt. Your mind wanders lazily through the day behind you, the grinding of grain in the cool morning air, the shaping of stubborn bread dough, the walk to the Nile with heavy jars, the thick smell of fermenting beer bubbling like a living thing in the corner of your home. All of it repetitive, yes, but somehow comforting. Every task predictable, every step familiar. In a world without clocks or alarms, your chores form the outline of time itself. And here comes your first joke of the section. If time in ancient Egypt could speak, it would probably say, "We're doing bread again today, aren't we?" And you would say, "Yes, yes, we are." You think of the vegetables, those pungent, proud onions and leeks that flavour nearly everything you eat. They're so basic, so ever-present, you might almost forget how important they are. But tonight you remember. They sustained you under the sun, mixed into stew, eaten raw, traded with friends. They're simple, yes, but they're also the most Egyptian thing in your entire kitchen. You shift slightly, feeling the coolness of the night air on your arms. Somewhere nearby, someone finishes a late task and closes a wooden door with a soft thump. You inhale slowly. The air smells faintly of warm earth, clay, and lingering cooking smoke. A quirky fact drifts through your mind as sleepiness tugs at your eyelids. Some Egyptians believed sleeping with an onion nearby kept illness and evil spirits away. Others swore that certain herbs under the pillow encouraged good dreams. Does it work? Who knows? But you have onions hanging 5 feet away, so you're as protected as anyone can be. Your limbs grow heavier. Your thoughts soften at the edges. You think of the wealthy and their cinnamon-scented kitchens, the festival foods that appear once in a while like edible miracles, the temple rations that keep entire workforces functioning. But here, in your small courtyard, your simple meal feels just right. Warm, predictable, soothing. You take another deep breath. Feel your ribs rise and fall. Hear the soft clatter of someone closing a jar. A donkey sighs somewhere, dramatically, because even animals in Egypt seem to understand the art of evening melodrama. And here's your second joke for the section. Nothing snores louder than a donkey who knows it doesn't have to wake up early. Your eyelids flutter open again for just a moment, catching a glimpse of the moon's reflection on the jars near the wall. Everything looks so still now. Familiar objects painted in silver light, your reed basket, your clay bowls, your mud brick walls, everyday things, worn and humble, yet somehow elegant in their quiet usefulness. These objects don't change much through your life. Your food doesn't change much. Your tasks don't change much. And yet the simplicity itself is soothing, predictable, balanced. Your thoughts begin to drift, loosen, soften. The warm heaviness in your stomach becomes a warm heaviness in your chest. Your arms relax. Your jaw loosens. You feel yourself inching towards sleep. A scholarly debate flickers briefly, almost faintly. Did ancient Egyptians fall asleep early because of the natural light cycle, or because their work days were simply exhausting? Some argue it was cultural, others say it was practical. But lying here now, you think the answer is obvious. When your entire day is filled with physical labour, sun, and meals that warm your bones, sleep comes easily. You shift once more on your mat, pulling the linen cloth up to your shoulders. The night wind drifts in through the open doorway, carrying the faint smell of the river and distant hearth smoke, and you exhale slowly, long and low, the kind of exhale that tells your body the day is over and rest is here. The stars flicker. The embers fade. Your heartbeat slows into the rhythm of old Egypt, steady and unhurried. You're full, warm, tired, safe. And the last thought that gently floats through your mind before sleep claims it is simple. The night deepens, smoothing the world into softer shapes and slower breaths. The warm scents of the day, bread, stew, herbs, faint smoke, fade into gentle memory as the cooler desert wind brushes along your skin, settling you further into the quiet. Your body grows heavier against the reed mat, each muscle loosening the way clay softens before it's shaped, giving in gradually, peacefully. The moon climbs higher, its pale glow touching the courtyard walls with that calm, silver-blue softness that only comes when the world has exhaled fully. Your breath follows that rhythm, slow inhale, even slower release, letting the thoughts of grinding grain, shaping dough and tending fires drift far from your mind. All the day's small efforts fade into a distant hum, softened by the steady comfort of a full belly and a gentle breeze. You allow your shoulders to melt downward, letting your hands rest where they fall. The warmth of the day is gone now, replaced by a cool, steady stillness that wraps itself around you like a quiet blanket. Each sound, distant water, soft braying, the faint rustle of palm leaves, blurs together into a peaceful lullaby. There's nothing left you need to do, no chores waiting, no weight to carry. Just this slow descent into rest, as ancient and familiar as the Nile's own rhythm. You sink a little deeper into the mat, breathing calmly, letting the last sparks of wakefulness drift outward like embers cooling in the night air. Everything is soft now, gentle, safe. Let your eyes grow heavy, let your thoughts unfurl and fade, and let sleep take you the way the desert takes the last light. Slowly, quietly, completely.